50,000 years ago, we humans were wandering the earth peaceful, curious, and surprisingly artsy. We painted caves, told stories, and apparently, we were all really into a mother goddess. Segment 1. The world before war. Back then, there were no kings, no empires, and no one yelling at you to pay taxes. Men and women were equals. Nobody owned land. And war? Almost non-existent. So here's the big question. How did we go from that, a world built on balance and compassion, to this? Because today, our world runs on hierarchy, property, and power systems, where men have historically dominated. But that wasn't always the case. For most of human history, it was the other way around. There was a time when Europe was ruled by women, when religion celebrated birth instead of death, and when art, not war, was humanity's greatest invention. Anthropologist Maria Gimbutas called this period, Old Europe, a civilization so peaceful, so creative, and so alien to our modern mindset that for decades, people thought it had to be a myth. But here's the twist. Recent DNA and archaeological discoveries are proving she was right. And the story of what came next, of how peace gave way to patriarchy, begins not with swords or kingdoms, but with a language. A single lost language that somehow connected everyone, from Vikings to Brahmins, from Athens to Iran. That language was Proto-Indo-European, and the people who spoke it may have rewritten the story of civilization itself. Segment 2. The lost language and the wheel. For centuries, scholars noticed something suspicious. The words for father and mother sounded way too similar across totally different languages. Father in English, pater in Latin, pitar in Sanskrit, pateras in Greek. It was as if all these cultures were quoting the same ancient dictionary one that had been lost for thousands of years. Linguists called this missing mother tongue Proto-Indo-European, or PIE. Through decades of detective work, researchers managed to reconstruct fragments of this ghost language. And what they found wasn't just linguistic, it was cultural. When they looked at the vocabulary, a picture started forming. These people had words for wheels, horses, milk, and yokes, but barely any for farming. That told us something huge. They weren't farmers. They were herders, nomadic people who roamed the grasslands, drinking milk and inventing transportation before it was cool. Most humans throughout history were lactose intolerant. You drink milk, you regret life. But the Proto-Indo-Europeans, or the Yamnaya, did something incredible. They evolved. They literally changed their DNA to digest milk. That may sound small, but it was a biological superpower. Suddenly, they had a constant food source. Milk, butter, cheese. Add that to protein from livestock, and they were taller, stronger, and healthier than almost everyone else around them. This mattered, because around 3,500 BCE, these people also invented something revolutionary, the wheel. With the wheel and the horse, they built wagons, the first mobile homes of human history. Picture ancient Mongolian nomads, but with better horse genes. They packed their families, tools, and livestock, and rolled across the open steppe, following grass and weather. And unknowingly, they carried with them the seeds of something far bigger. Their language, their genes, and their worldview. For centuries, we didn't know if this was myth or conquest. Did the Proto-Indo-Europeans politely share their culture, or violently spread it like an ancient empire? For a long time, historians leaned toward the nice version, cultural diffusion. But then, DNA happened. Over the last decade, scientists analyzed ancient skeletons, and the results were shocking. Entire populations in Europe vanished genetically around 3000 BCE. The old genes? Replaced. That's not diffusion. That's conquest. But before that, conquest reshaped Europe forever. Before the age of warriors and patriarchy, there was something else. A civilization unlike any other. Peaceful, artistic, and ruled not by kings, but by mothers. Anthropologist Maria Gimbutas called it Old Europe. And it might just be the most extraordinary and forgotten chapter in the story of civilization. Segment 3. The world of the Mother Goddess. Imagine a Europe with no kings, no armies, no fortresses, no one giving orders and no one taking them. Homes were small, comfortable, nearly identical. No palaces, no prisons, no rich, no poor. And in every home, one figure watched over the family. a round, powerful woman carved from stone, clay, or ivory, the Mother Goddess. Gimbutas called this civilization Old Europe, a network of farming communities that thrived from about 6,500 to 2,500 BCE, stretching from the Balkans to the Danube and across the Aegean. To her, these weren't primitive tribes. They were something far more profound, a civilization built on balance. Between men and women, between humans and nature, between life and death itself. And their religion, the cult of the Mother Goddess, reflected that balance. She wasn't just a fertility figure. She was life itself. Every river, every animal, every sprouting seed, her energy flowed through it all. To kill a tree or an animal was to harm the divine. In Gimbutas's words, the goddess in all her forms was the symbol of the unity of all life in nature. That belief shaped everything. Where later civilizations built walls, these people built shrines. Where others forged swords, they crafted pottery and art. Even after learning metallurgy, how to work with metal, they didn't make weapons. They made jewelry. Their culture was stable for thousands of years longer than Rome, longer than Egypt's golden age, and there's no evidence of mass warfare. For millennia, Europe was peaceful, which, if you've studied European history, sounds almost illegal. So why did no one believe Gimbutas? Well, academia, like most things in history, was dominated by men. And when she presented her findings in the 1972nd, saying, essentially, Europe was once ruled by women and peace, the reaction was not great. Women in charge? Ha, must have been the mushrooms talking. She was dismissed as a dreamer because the idea that there once existed a civilization without war, greed, or patriarchy didn't fit the story we tell ourselves. But then science caught up. Recent DNA evidence now confirms that before 3000 BCE, Europe really was populated by peaceful farming societies genetically distinct from the later, warlike steppe invaders. In other words, Gimbutas wasn't imagining things. She was 4 decades ahead of her time. Life in Old Europe revolved around art, ritual, and community. They celebrated the cycles of nature, birth, growth, decay, renewal. They didn't fear death, it was just part of the loop, the next turn of the spiral. Even their colors flipped our modern values. Black wasn't evil, it was the color of rich soil, of fertility, of the womb. White symbolized death, the color of bones. They believe snakes symbolize regeneration because snakes shed their skin and are reborn. It's hard to overstate how different their worldview was from ours. Today, we measure progress by conquest, money, and control. They measured it by harmony, art, and renewal. And they even invented writing before the Sumerians, not for taxes or trade, but for prayer. Their earliest inscriptions weren't ledgers. They were blessings carved into pottery and tombs. They wrote not to count things, but to make them sacred. Humanity's first words weren't, "Who owes me grain?" but, "May life be blessed." That's the world we lost. But this peaceful civilization, egalitarian, artistic, goddess-centered, had no idea what was coming. Across the steppes, a new people were on the move. Taller, stronger, armed with horses, wagons, and a brand new worldview. And when they arrived, the world of the goddess would never be the same. Segment 4. The power of women and the rules that didn't exist. Yet, if you were born in Old Europe around 5000 BCE, your world would have looked surprisingly equal. Men and women both farmed, made art, and led rituals. There was no king, no queen, just community. And here's the part that shocks modern audiences most. Women own their bodies. No shame, no double standards, no proper behavior. If a woman wanted to have children, she did. If she didn't, no one forced her. If she had multiple lovers, no one judged her. Because, honestly, no one knew who the father was and no one cared. To them, life came from the Mother Goddess. Every child was her child. And that meant every adult was responsible for every child. No concept of my genes or my inheritance, just our people. That sense of shared responsibility created something powerful. A society without orphans, without private property, without loneliness. You didn't need a marriage contract to guarantee love. The community itself was the family. Now, compare that to today's world, where we act like a woman's choices are everyone's business. Back then, The idea of shaming a woman for her sexuality would have made zero sense. Their logic went like this. If life comes from the mother goddess, and if men merely contribute energy, then more partners means more energy, stronger life. We can debate the biology, but the idea itself shows how deeply their worldview centered on life, not control. And funny enough, biology kind of backs them up. In nature, female primates often form alliances through intimacy. Bonobo females, for example, build peace through connection. They use affection, not aggression, to keep harmony in the group. Old Europe worked the same way. Women didn't need armies to maintain order. They had subtler weapons, gossip, shame, and when necessary, withholding affection. Instead of punishment, they used social pressure. Instead of fear, they used belonging. And that's the genius of matriarchal power. It's not about dominance, it's about connection. This doesn't mean they lived in a perfect utopia. There was conflict, jealousy, and probably a few broken clay pots thrown in anger. But the overall system rewarded empathy over ego, which made women incredibly effective leaders. Men chase power like it's a limited resource. Someone has to lose so someone else can win. Women in these societies saw power as something shared. The goal wasn't to win the argument. The goal was to keep the tribe alive. So when two communities clashed, it wasn't who has the bigger army. It was, okay, let's get the women together and sort this out before the men ruin everything. According to Gimbutas, this female-led order, this culture of balance, made Europe peaceful for thousands of years, longer than any modern nation has survived. But then came the outsiders, people who saw the world not as a circle, but as a ladder. Not as we, but as mine. They had horses, they had weapons, and they believed in something new, power through domination. The Proto-Indo-Europeans, the Yamnaya, were on their way, and with them came the end of the Mother Goddess's world. Segment 5, when the riders came. For 4,000 years, Europe lived in balance. The rivers ran through peaceful villages. Art, music, and ritual flowed together. But one day the horizons started to move. They came from the north of the Black Sea, from a place of endless grass and sky. We call them the Yamnaya, the first people to ride horses, to master the wheel, and to weaponize mobility. They brought something Europe had never seen before: speed, shock, and war. For the first time in human history, you could move faster than you could run, and kill faster than you could speak. To the peaceful farmers of old Europe, these horsemen must have seemed like gods or demons, taller, stronger, glowing with the power of milk and meat. And when they arrived, they didn't trade. They conquered. For decades, historians argued, was this a slow diffusion of ideas, or a violent invasion? DNA finally answered the question. Entire gene pools disappeared. Whole populations replaced. That's not diffusion, that's extinction. The Yamnaya weren't just spreading language. They were spreading a new way of thinking, one built on hierarchy, ownership, and violence. In their world, the sacred feminine, the mother, the earth, the cycle of life, was replaced by the sacred masculine, the warrior, the sky father, the conqueror. The goddess who once gave life became a god who demanded sacrifice. And just like that, thousands of years of peace collapsed. Villages that had never known fortifications built walls for the first time. Communities that once shared everything began to hoard. Men once equals became rulers. Women once leaders became property. The DNA tells the story better than any myth. After 3000 BCE, the old genes vanish. The new ones, the Yamnaya, spread from the Balkans to the British Isles, from Persia to the Ganges. In just a few centuries, they reshaped the map and the human story. Their legacy survives in our tongues every time you say mother, father, brother, or name the stars. You're speaking their words. But their victory came at a cost. The world they replaced, the world of old Europe, was erased. Its art buried, its stories forgotten, its goddesses turned into myths. And yet, the echoes remain. In every mother who gives life, in every culture that still honors the earth, in every person who believes peace is not weakness, but wisdom. Because maybe the story of civilization isn't just about who conquered whom. Maybe it's about remembering what we lost and wondering if, someday, we could find it again. Next time, the rise of the Indo. Europeans, how the horsemen rewrote the world. So, that's how the world of the goddess faded into the age of warriors, how balance gave way to power. But the story isn't over yet, because in the upcoming episodes, we'll meet the people who built our modern world, the Indo-European conquerors who carried language, myth, and violence across continents. If you're enjoying this journey through the birth and the betrayal of civilization, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss episode 5, Yamnaya Conquest of Europe. Until then, take care of each other, and remember, the oldest civilization we ever built was one without war.